Ed, just hang on a moment. I want to bring in a managing partner of SpaceFund. It is a venture capital firm investing in space startups. She was also an early investor in SpaceX, of course. SpaceFund managing partner Meagan Crawford joins us now from Houston, where you're obviously watching this with enormous excitement. The first all-civilian orbital space flight well underway. You talk about, just the significance of this. Up until this point, you say 95% of people going into space have been professional astronauts. You see a world where 95% will be normal people. How scalable is this business? How quickly could we get to that reality?
So there's a lot of factors in that, of course. A lot of it has to do with competition, just like with any business sector, right? Elon and SpaceX are doing a phenomenal job, but there are companies coming up right behind him that will soon have human orbital launch capabilities. And as we have more competition in the industry, obviously we're going to see prices come down. As SpaceX continues to innovate, as their Starship comes online, we're going to see prices fall even further. And I envision a world in 10 years or so where your normal family is deciding whether they want to go to Disney World or they want to go to outer space for their summer vacation. And I think that affordability is on the horizon.
Why now? Why are we getting this space tourism excitement happening right now in this decade? And why now? Why not a few years earlier or later? We are now saying the Falcon 9 first stage booster is about to land back down on Earth. We are going to show you those pictures as we get them. But yeah, Meagan, why now the excitement? Let's listen in first.
To land, and the second stage, everything is going well. It is headed into orbit with the crew on board.
Actually, there on your screen, you can see a sunrise horizon there with planet Earth just behind the glowing MVAC engine.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
All out stage 2 in terminal guidance. We're at the altitude. We're working the angular momentum we need to get into the right orbit. And if you're wondering, crew's pulling about 3.5 Gs right now, less than they took on the first stage flight.
So in about 15 seconds, we are expecting
Copy, Shannon.
We are expecting
throttle down.
The MVAC to throttle down and cut off an event called second engine cutoff, and then we'll wait for the confirmation of good orbit. At the same time, the first stage will be beginning its landing burn. And here we have the MVAC. We just saw that it shut off its engine.
Stage 1, landing burn still up.
Just walk us through what's happening. Ed, let me just go back to you. Walk us through what's happening right now. Of course, we are also waiting for that second engine cutoff as well.
Yeah, so Sherry, as you pointed out, obviously there's some latency on the feed you can see on your screen, but what you are seeing on your screen is that first stage booster touching down on the autonomous drone platform out in the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of Florida. It's very normal for the camera to cut out at this stage, as you said, but they'll take a different shot. And what I think we're seeing on the right-hand side of your screen is kind of the first glimpses of the crew inside Dragon capsule, which is absolutely astonishing. We also got that second stage engine cutoff, and now, really the big milestone is about 2 minutes away, where we get that separation between the Dragon capsule and the second stage booster. And from there, this is where it gets to crunch time, right? Because at this point, SpaceX has several opportunities along the way to abort, okay? And the way that the Dragon capsule aborts is it jettisons itself from either the first stage or the second stage booster. But there comes a certain point where you go past the final abort zone. We'll be honest, we don't actually know when that is. I haven't heard it called out on the feed yet. But when we do get that separation between the Dragon and the second stage, it's open to the thrusters, it's open to the engines that are on board the Dragon to position and maneuver the capsule into a trajectory that takes it to that orbital apogee of 360 miles. But from what I can see on my screen, that is a crew that seems very calm and seems very comfortable.
They do, don't they? Waving at the audience back on Earth. We've got another minute or so until that separation sequence, as you say, that crucial separation from the second stage of the Dragon. What are we looking out for? And I suppose, is there a point in this process where they can actually relax?
Well, is there one? I mean, so what happens at the 13-minute mark is the the nose cone on the Dragon capsule will open, and it will reveal a very large curved window. Now, when SpaceX sends Dragon and astronauts up to the ISS, when the nose cone opens, that is what it uses to dock with ISS. But they're not docking with ISS. They are going 360 miles into space. And that process is about approximately 2.5 hours long. If there was ever a time to sit in a chair, ponder about life, ponder about your achievements to date, it's probably the 2.5 hours where you're drifting off into space.
You can just imagine the view, right? And we're talking about being 3 days in orbit. This will be the longest any human being will spend consecutively inside a Dragon capsule. Tell us about the magnitude of this experience.
Yeah, a fine achievement for SpaceX as well, because as you say, of course, they have ferried professional astronauts to and from the International Space Station. But what happens is the astronauts hop off at the other end, right? They get off Dragon capsule and they board ISS and they live on board for a period of months. But these guys will be inside Dragon capsule for the longest consecutive period that any human being has done. And you underscore with that with these are civilians, they're not professional astronauts, 3 days orbiting Earth. And what's really interesting is, you know, to communicate with SpaceX, you're relying on satellites that are in low Earth orbit. You're relying on receivers and ground stations. And inevitably, there will be periods of time where the Dragon capsule is orbiting Earth and it will lose contact with SpaceX. And that is what part of the training has been, to know what to do, to be patient, to wait. And that's kind of astonishing, right, guys? Imagine silence out in space with no contact back on Earth, even if it's just for a few seconds.
Right, and hang in there because we do want to go back to our guest, Meagan Crawford, who's a managing partner at SpaceFund. Meagan, thank you so much for hanging in there. We were talking about this flight being all civilians, no professional astronauts. I was in the midst of asking you why we're seeing such a booming space tourism industry now.
Yeah, I think it has to do with a lot of factors, a lot of things that have been happening behind the scenes for years now, for 30 or 40 years, as people whose names you may never know were walking the halls of Congress and changing laws and policies to make this even possible from a legal perspective. Obviously, we've had the technology, since the 1960s, but there really wasn't the political will until this last 20 years or so. And then on top of that, the financing. That's obviously a really big part of this. And so enter the billionaire cavalry, the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos and Richard Bransons of the world, who were motivated, who grew up in the era of Apollo and wanted to see a private space industry exist to the point where they were willing to put their own fortunes on the line. And so that combination of the changing political environment and the financing to actually make this real is what's creating the business environment you're seeing today in the space industry.
This is Stephen Engel out in Hong Kong. Of course, I'm in a region where they're creating more billionaires every year than anywhere else in the world. And they're probably watching this with great interest if they can hop on board as well. What do you think, and at what time frame do we get down to that sweet spot? I mean, not everybody has $100 or $200 dollars to pay for this. I think the next big civilian flight is going to be, what, a $55 million ticket. What's the sweet spot to make this space tourism take off, as you said?
So there's a lot of different opinions about kind of where that elasticity is, right? Is it $1,000? Is it $10,000? Is it $1 million? Where do you get to that level where you've got both a robust, customer environment, but it's also down to an affordable level? And so there's kind of a lot of different theories about that, but what I'm really interested in is when it becomes affordable for your normal family. And I think that's probably 10 or 15 years away, but I think that it's definitely within our lifetimes that we'll see people normal people, so to speak, vacationing in space. And as you mentioned, the Axiom flight that's coming up next year, those tickets are $55 million. To ride on a Richard Branson flight, which is obviously much different because it's suborbital, is about $450,000. And then a company called Space Perspective is doing high altitude balloons to the edge of space, and that's only $125,000 a ticket. And so there'll be a lot of different experiences, just like with any kind of tourism market. You'll be able to pick your own adventure, let's say, and pick the space adventure that's right for you.
What's the timeline for Starship, and how does that change the game in terms of human space travel?
That is going to be a huge game changer, both for the kind of human space travel market, but also for the cost of getting non-squishy materials, whether those are satellites or fuel or whatever, up to orbit. You showed that great chart a moment ago about the significant drop in launch cost over the last 20 years. That's going to continue to happen because of Starship. And as we get that cost down to hundreds of dollars a kilogram, not thousands, you're going to start to see all kinds of new business cases open up. Business cases that don't close today, but they will close at $100 or $200 or $500 a kilogram. And so the ability to take 100 people or so to space on a Starship, even if you don't go to the moon or Mars, just taking 100 people to space is going to be a huge game changer. Right now, humanity's only interaction with the frontier of space has been, up until now, the professional astronauts on the space station. It takes 2.75 people just to keep the space station up and running. And sometimes there's only 3 people on station. And so that means there's 1/4 of one person's time doing all of the intellectual property, all of the thinking about the universe, as was mentioned earlier, all of the art and music and development is 1/4 of one person's time, and that person's a government employee. So how is that going to change when you have 100 people going to space at a time? What new business models and what new adventures are going to come for humanity is anybody's guess.
Meagan, as you know, there was a Netflix Crew, a documentary series following the Inspiration 4 crew for months, and in one scene they debated the merits of going to 360 miles orbital apogee. Why just not play it safe? So I asked Jared Isaacman about that, and he basically said to me, like, remember the original goal for SpaceX. They want to colonize Mars. They want humans to be an interplanetary species. And by making it 360 miles, he felt it was a really substantive step towards that. My question to you is driving progress just going to rely on people like Jared Isaacman to put up their checkbook? Or do investors like you see an event like this and think, you know what, we need to pour capital into this industry as fast as possible? What's your take?
I am of the opinion that we need to pour capital into this industry as fast as possible. That's one of the biggest things that's slowing it down right now, is a lack of capital. Obviously, Elon has an incredible ability to raise capital. Bezos is using his own capital from his Amazon stock, but is that really sustainable in the long term? No, it's not. We need an economic system. One of the things we say here at SpaceFund when we talk about settling the frontier is nobody stays until somebody pays. This is why we don't have a moon base right now, because the original moon race was driven by socioeconomic and political reasons, not by economic reasons. And so if you want space settlement to be a reality, if you want it to be sustainable, there has to be an economic backbone to that. And SpaceX and others are starting to really prove that case as we're starting to see more and more revenue. As I'm sure you guys have covered here on Bloomberg, we've had so many public market exits this year of space companies, showing that this industry is really starting to get to a level of maturity where we can expect good revenue numbers quarter after quarter, when we can have these public companies that are gaining significant market share and the hearts and minds of the public. And so I think that what you're seeing right now is just the beginning, and we're really focused on infusing that capital at the early stages right now. The space companies that make the news are, you know, a few bright names and shining stars, but we're currently tracking 2,500 space startup companies around the world, and most of these are still at the seed and Series A level. They're very young, and they need capital now, and they're going to continue to need growth capital, and they might not have a billionaire backer. And so that's why it's important, like for firms like mine to exist and to continue to kind of feed the bottom of the pyramid in this industry and really get that economic system up and running.
So that's how you play it as a VC. For other investors back on Earth, how do you kind of identify the compelling investment opportunities in this new gold rush? And I know Sherry was really interested in whether you see opportunities in Chinese space companies.
So from an investment perspective, the Chinese market is a little interesting. It's a little different. How much of these companies, especially with something as so important to national defense, how much are these companies really private companies via public companies in China is kind of anybody's guess at this point right now. But kind of around the rest of the world, I will say that, retail investors beware. Not every space company is a great company. Just like with any sector, you need to do your due diligence. You need to, be wary of a lot of these companies right now that are pre-revenue companies that have gone public. That might be a level of risk that your average retail investor isn't willing to take. And so, pay attention to the numbers, pay attention to who and what is backing these companies. But I think that there's going to be a lot of really interesting public market opportunities coming down the pike. I think we've seen 9 or 10 space companies go public this year, and we expect to top that number next year. So there should be a wide variety of companies for retail investors to choose from. There's also several ETFs that are already up and running that allow kind of a little bit more of a portfolio approach for retail investors. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for investors across the board in this industry in the coming years.
Meagan, so great to have you with us. Meagan Crawford, SpaceFund managing partner and early investor in SpaceX. Of course, saying goodbyes to the rest of our little crew as well. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, who's at the Kennedy Space Center. Stephen Engel there in Hong Kong. Sherry, as we mark this momentum day, of course, SpaceX successfully, I think we can say now, sending those all-civilian astronauts into orbital spaceflight. Really just one important step into making human spaceflight more of a commonality. All right, let's take a look at back down to